Good morning. We're about ready to get started. My name is Milford McGirt. I serve as the board chair for the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education. That's one of my jobs. My primary day job is I'm the managing partner with KPMG here in Atlanta, and very excited to welcome you all this morning to the program. It's a little bit of a rainy, dreary day in Atlanta, but we've got an exciting program for you this morning, and I'm really excited. So my word for the day is curious. Can everybody say that? Curious? All right. So we're going to, in the corporate world, in the business world, there's a lot of a focus around big data and information and using that to make decisions. So we're going to hear some information today from a chief regarding some research they've done nationally with regard to education, primarily K through 12, and it's going to focus on looking at various jurisdictions and public perception. And when I think about it, in terms of representing the board, we have and we got a couple of our board members here. Jimmy Stokes, I saw, Pat Willis, thank y'all for being here as well. But part of what we do is use data to make decisions, and obviously it's very important for our state legislature as well as they make public policy decisions, which is right in line with what we do. So really excited to hear the information. I'm going to bring Steve Dollinger up, our president, here in a second to talk a little bit more about the program and the work and what the Georgia Partnership's doing in response to some of the information we're going to hear today. So the format's a little bit different. It's a little bit of a classroom setting. We've got tables set up. There are facilitators at each of the tables. And it's going to be a little bit of a working session once we hear the information to share some thoughts and ideas around education reform and how we respond to the data that we're going to hear. So with that, Steve, I'll bring you up on stage, and let's go ahead and give him a hand. Welcome to the stage.
Well, good morning. Welcome to an exciting day for us, the partnership. A lot of hard work over the last couple of years is coming to fruition, and we are just as excited as we can be that you're here with us for the official rollout of some really important pieces. Part of my role here, as always, is to go through the packet real quickly so you'll know what's there. So if you look at the right side of your packet, of course, we have the agenda. You can see the format of the program, but it's a little different than our normal format. We actually have two parts today. Georgia education, the public perception, and Milford just mentioned that. That'll be a first part. And then we'll have the chart in education reform, where Dana will help us launch our EdQuest. So that's going to be exciting to have both those pieces. Just a little housekeeping piece real quickly. If you've parked in the garage right behind us, if you stop by the desk out here, they will validate that, not totally, but for a discount for your parking. So on your way out, don't forget to do that. I have to thank AT&T. They have long been one of the supporters for the partnership, and they specifically like to support our critical issue forums during the year. As always, we have the bios for our presenters. So when I invite them to come up to the stage, we'll just invite them to come up and you'll know who they are, but you can read their bios here. I'll talk more about this list of the steering committee and our advisory committee in a few minutes. But of those 8 people in the steering committee, we have some here today. I've seen around the room Kadira and Stephanie Blank. Thank you for being here and doing all the work that we've done over the last few years. A lot of our 25 folks who are on the advisory committee. I'll talk some more about that in a minute, but that is an important group of people. Matt Cardoza, our communication director in the back, standing in the doorway there, put together a sheet that you could use, some samples of social media strategies you can use for Facebook and Twitter. At the bottom is the website for the EdQuest, and at the very bottom is our website, which has all that on there also. If you have any other questions about the press release that went out today or any of these social media strategies, just see Matt at your convenience. Next are 3 articles just to give you an idea of how we are out in the hard copy and electronic media world. The first one we did was September-October issue of James Magazine, when we were giving our opinions and assessment of the state's ESSA plan as it was being finalized and submitted. The next one, Dana was talking about our talent gap and encouraging people to convene, connect, and commit to help improve education in Georgia. And then the other one is by Caitlin Daugherty-Kakinas. Part of that supporting learning environment you'll hear about later this morning, a key piece of high-performing states, and she was talking there about school nutrition. In the last yellow-colored page, if you'd like to be on our distribution list so that you get invitations to these kinds of events, publications we put out, some hot research that might be really current, just fill this out and leave it at the desk on the way out. And at the bottom, again, are ways that you can contact and communicate with us. Reminder that the program today is being videotaped. It'll be on our website next week. A lot of information to share today that you might want to go back and review some yourself, as well as if you have some friends and colleagues that were not able to be here, they'll be able to see that on our website. I don't know if it's too crowded when you came in to see some of the information that was on the table there that you could pick up. There's additional copies of the EdQuest information, but there's also copies, hard copies of our top 10 issues to watch if you'd like to have a hard copy in addition to having the electronic copies at your disposal. So with that, let me go to the next part of our program. Milford mentioned the work with Achieve. Achieve has been a good partner for us over the last several years, way back when they were working on high school diplomas and that whole focus. We would take teams from Georgia and go to DC and be part of those conversations. But more recently, they have been helping us and a few other states with our coalitions. As you know, we started that back with the Common Core legislation, and we were successful there bringing groups of people together. Since we don't lobby, it's good to have people together who can share their voice and influence legislation. We were successful then with Common Core. We were successful with some data legislation. In fact, I have to applaud our little team that the Data Quality Campaign in DC gave us their Flashlight Award that year for shining the light on policy, and it was policy to do with data usage. But Achieve has been helping us even more with some polling. They have polled nationally and then overlaid specifically for Georgia. So you can see with the bios, we have Michael Gilligan and Hans Voss here to share that information with us. So gentlemen, please come up and share this and the messaging that you could use in your work to help improve education in our state.
I'm Michael Gilligan. I'm the Vice President for Strategic Initiatives at Achieve. And let me tell you a little bit more about Achieve. And we've been so pleased to work with the Georgia Partnership. But although we are based in Washington, D.C., we're an action think tank that actually works on state policy with state leaders. We were founded by state leaders 20 years ago with, at the time, the audacious idea that all students should graduate high school ready for life, ready to go to college and to actually be able to earn credit in college right out of high school. Wish that weren't an audacious idea. Still, we have so far to go to achieve that. To enter into the workforce with the potential to gain a middle-class wage job so that there's the training provided through high school that allows someone to enter the workforce, or to enter into service, to enter into our military service. So the idea that all kids should be ready for life after high school is our founding principle. And we've worked with states over the past 20 years, as Steve mentioned, through a project we started with you all here in Georgia, the American Diploma Project, where we worked with states to help develop a common diploma. The ideas about what it takes to move from grade to grade to get to home, to get to that idea of college and career readiness. And that work evolved to us working with states on the Common Core state standards and also on the next generation science standards. But that's not what my colleague Hans and I really focus on. We actually do focus on, as Steve mentioned, coalition building. So we work with 12 states that we call the Coalition Support Network. And in that project, we seek to raise the voices of state-based advocates around the college and career ready agenda. So it's a learning community These 12 states, some of your peer states here in the South are Tennessee and Alabama. We support the Expect More, Achieve More coalition in Tennessee, which is led by Tennessee SCORE. And we support the Alabama Grit Coalition in Alabama, which is led by A+ Education, as well as covering all the quadrants of the country. So one of the things about this learning community of state-based coalitions is that we do public opinion research, and we've conducted public opinion research over the past several years in support of that coalition support network effort. So what Hans and I are going to talk with you a little bit about today are some of the findings that we have both from our national survey and from the survey that we conducted here in Georgia this summer. And Hans will walk you through the details of that.
How we conduct this. As Michael talked about, we have our group of 12 state coalitions that we work with, and we wanted to make sure, different from the polling that we've done in the past, we wanted to make sure that this survey was really informed by those 12 groups of state advocates that we work with. So we brought them together for a meeting in New Orleans, not just for this poll, but there was one thing we talked about, to see what kinds of things did you want to know both nationally and in your states about public perceptions and public opinion. From there, we conducted 2 qual board online discussion groups, which is kind of like an in-person focus group, but in an online format, kind of like an online forum, to talk a little bit and get more information about how people are thinking about topics in public education. And so from there, we developed the surveys. And to be clear, it was one national survey of 1,000 registered voters and then 12 individual state surveys. So not necessarily, it wasn't an oversample of Georgia voters, but it was its own separate survey with the same questions and the same methods. So on a couple of slides here this morning, you'll see some comparisons both to that national data and to some other states. And then as a follow-up to that, we also did some more in-depth qualitative online discussions. On the next slide, you'll see that we conducted the survey in July. So over the summer, not hot off the presses, but still pretty recent. And it was registered voters, right? So not parents, not the public generally, just registered voters, but it is a representative sample of folks in Georgia. And on the next slide, we will dig into some of those questions, and on the next one again. So here is one of the questions that we asked, just a sample, and we asked a few different questions like these. We wanted to see what are 2 items as it relates to education that concern you the most, right? So we offered those options there on the right. It wasn't an open response. We did offer them just those 7 options. And you'll see there that all of those percentages will add up to 200 because folks could select just 2. And you'll see that the number one thing that concerns Georgia voters the most is low expectations for students. That's actually different. If you look at the comparison to the national data, there on the right, that the number one concern across the country was funding. And it's a close second for you all here in Georgia. But nationally and in almost all of the states, funding was the number one concern. As opposed to here in Georgia, low expectations for our students is something that concerns you all the most. Another thing that surprised us about this data is how low too much testing was, both here in Georgia and across the country. If you think about some of the hysteria actually that we've had about testing in our country and about how much testing we're providing to our kids, it surprised us a little bit that that number actually came out so low. And these results should be affirming, right, for those of us that achieve, that fight for high expectations and quality assessments for students, as well as for all of you that people are really clamoring for high expectations for kids and don't see it as a problem, that we have quality assessments that let us know how well our students and our schools are doing. The next slide, I think Michael is going to dig into a little bit more, some wording, some messaging testing.
Yes, so we did A/B testing. And I think if you're not familiar with that terminology, so we tested essentially the value propositions of our lexicon of one word versus another word, and which of the two resonated more with you. And as you'll see, I'll do your view. So the column on the left, which begins with equity, transparency, achievement, testing, accountability, standards, reform. I think one might say that those are edu-speak, that these are terms that we in the education community bandy about with some frequency. And the column of words on the right were our best attempt at an analog with kind of homespun language, with more common lexicon, more general purpose use of words. So let me also draw your attention to the rows. As you can see right there up on the top, as I point out equity, the 39%, well, interesting, 39% of people, equity resonated more with them versus 59% of people in Georgia, fairness as a term with regard to values in public education resonated more with them. And then right underneath that is the national sample, so 39% and 60%. So I think there's just some small decile differences between Georgia and the national sample. But overall, as you look through this A/B testing of the words, you see there's pretty close alignment between the Georgia results and the national results. And that held true in all the 12 states in which we conducted this sample, is that there was pretty decent alignment between what voters, and again, let me just point out, this was a voter poll. This wasn't a parent or an educator poll. This is people who are U.S. voters. So Georgia voters said that 39% of them supported equity as a value in public education versus fairness. So now let me unpack this just even a little bit more. When we in the education community talk about these terms, so many of my colleagues, and I'm sure so many of you, think that equity is a core value in terms of what we're doing in public education, that we're trying to provide equity in education. And these results should not dissuade you from the idea that that is a core value for you. However, we would recommend when you are discussing issues around equity with the general public, perhaps if you're at a school site, if you're talking with parents, you're talking with community members, bear in mind that equity means something to you that might not be as resonant to them as saying, we're talking about fairness. Where and the list goes on. As you can see, the only two terms where the edu-speak terminology kind of is as resonant as what we thought of as more general purpose language were achievement and accountability versus progress and responsibility. But I also want to draw your attention to reform. I have worked in the education sector for over a quarter century, and I've called myself an education reformer. I am not going to do that anymore. These results, and in some of the states where we've done this presentation, some of the coalition members in those states are with an organization called DFER, which is Democrats for Education Reform. And you should just see the face bombs that they do when they see this language. But the thing about it is it really struck us, like how toxic this idea of education reform is versus improvement. And Hans is going to unpack that for you.
Yeah. So, as Michael alluded to, this caused us to think a little bit more about this. So on the next slide, you'll see that we decided to do a national Google survey. So this was even a separate little bit. If you've ever seen, you click on a link to a local news article and ask you which brand of laundry detergent do you like best before you can read the full article. That's literally what Google surveys are. So we decided to use that for our own purposes to test a little bit more about what do people think about education reform versus other topics. So we looked at education reform versus transform, and it turned out that transform came out on top. We actually we got that idea when we were doing a presentation almost exactly similar to this one in Colorado. Someone suggested to us, what about transforming education? How do people feel about that? So we wanted to see, and transform came out on top. So then, who among those three sort of takes the cake? So then we tested improve versus transform, and then you'll see resoundingly improve came out on top still. So we do think after going through sort of multiple rounds of testing that improve really is something, when you think about we're improving education, we're making things better, that's something that people can really get behind no matter what. Oh, on the next slide. So then we want to do a little bit more message testing. And this isn't necessarily traditional message testing in a few ways. We're not trying to get down to specific words with our messages about public education. We're actually trying to test what do people value in public education. So these are really value statements. And our pollster helped us do what they call M3 message testing. And that puts side by side for people, again, this was an online poll. This is something that doing it online, that's the only way we could have done something like this. You can't really do this sort of thing over the phone where you present people with 4 different messages about public education and ask them to rank them and see which one really reaches them the best. This M3 message testing, not only does it see what messages reach folks the best, but also what messages persuade them the most, looking at both reach and persuasion, because we want to see not only singular messages that reach them, but also what messages work together in combination. If you can read that bottom bullet there, it gives an analogy for a menu. You want a burger, fries go really well with that. We're in Atlanta, so Coke goes really well with those. But for some folks, they might want sweet tea with their burger and fries. So we want to see among folks what different messages work best together, and Michael's going to talk a little bit more about which messages we tested on the next slide.
So you'll see 10 messages here. How well you can read them. Can you read them in the back? No? I will read them aloud. Yeah, I can't even read it on that slide. But I will read them aloud and then I'll talk about them. So the top one is studies show that better educated individuals tend to earn more, live longer and healthier lives, and be happier. Supporting our public education system is one of the best investments we can make for the well-being of future generations. The second one is our public schools don't just teach our children academics, they also instill values that help guide them through the rest of their lives and make them productive members of society. The next is a free public education available to all children is a uniquely American value. It's not just about educating individuals, but learning about our history and values and creating community. The US is a diverse society, and public schools provide an opportunity for people of all economic, racial, and ethnic backgrounds to learn to live and work together. Participating productively in a democratic society requires understanding our political process and being able to evaluate issues, tools for citizenship that should be taught in our public schools. The next is, in addition to educating students, our public schools are often a source of shelter, nutrition, healthcare, and daycare, and often serve as community centers. The next is low-skilled jobs are being moved overseas or replaced by technology. So a strong public education system is necessary to prepare the next generation for the jobs of the future. Number 8 is advocating for strong public schools not only helps our children's future, it provides our communities an opportunity to come together. The next is without strong support, public education will collapse as more parents choose other options, such as private schools and homeschooling, leaving us even more divided than we already are. And the last is, most of tomorrow's leaders in business, government, and science will come from our public school system. So now I'll unpack this all for you. So these are value statements around public education, and this is different kind of message testing for us. As Hans pointed out, this was delivered online to people, so the respondents had the ability to read these messages as opposed to a telephone survey. There's no way we could have done this on telephone. Like, do you prefer message 1 versus message 10? I was like, how do I keep that straight in my head? So people had access to this information online, and they went through this process where they selected the value statement that resonated the most with them. And they iterated this, I think it says it went through 12,000 iterations. Like, they iterated it a tremendous number of times. So we have a lot of confidence. There's a very, very high confidence level that the top scoring message is the most resonant message, both nationally and in Georgia. And across the 12 states in our coalition support network, that was the #1 message. And as you can see, with that 19.2 score, 19.6 in Georgia, it's #1 with a bullet. It's the most powerful message. Yes, I will, because I'm gonna talk a lot about this message. So I'll get there in a minute. And I just wanna point out, like, this isn't actually a percentage breakdown, it's actually the score breakdown. So that 19.2 over 13.1, or here in Georgia, 19.6 over 12.6, that's really just to indicate it's scored that much higher. And then for, excuse me, the majority of the other messages, they're really banded together. There's not a tremendous amount of difference between how resonant those messages are with folks. It's just that #1 message is so very, very resonant with people. There's one difference between Georgia and our national sample. You can see that we have them rank ordered here by the national sample, but the low-skilled jobs are being moved overseas or replaced by technology. So a strong public education system is necessary to prepare the next generation for the jobs of the future. That actually was a higher scoring message here in Georgia than the message before that. And then let me just tell you what I think the value statement embedded in each of these is. In that top scoring message, it is about how education is a pathway to a good life. And so it's a valuable investment for us. And the second message is really about the values, about values being instilled by attending public school, by attending a school system. The third message is really about American exceptionalism. The fourth message is really a melting pot message. I suspect that Dana and team can make these messages available to you. Yes. You'll get them. The fifth message is really a civics message, that civics should be in schools. The next message, the sixth message, is a community hub. Interesting in Illinois, because there's so much, because I think there was so much overweighting in Chicago, where schools really are community hubs, where people do use services that are provided by schools. Community members use services at schools. That really resonated with people in Illinois. The seventh message is about international competitiveness. The 8th message is about community building. So slight nuance between sort of the community hub idea versus the community building. I'd say it's more about boosterism. And maybe boosterism is kind of a derogatory term. I'd say like it's more about generating community than being a hub for the community. The 9th message is really about the epistemic break that I think we're all afraid of in our current political climate, that we're not able to come together. And so if we choose our own ways, that we'll become even more divided. And then the last message is about developing the leadership of the future. So I said I would unpack this one a lot. Like I said, that top scoring message, really strong. 60% of respondents here in Georgia picked that as their first or second choice. And I'll read it again. Studies show that better educated individuals tend to earn more, live longer and healthier lives, and be happier. Supporting our public education system is one of the best investments we can make for the well-being of future generations. Now I'll unpack it a little bit more. So this is kind of author's message. The words that resonate with people, that are important to people, studies. People are like, oh, is this true? Well, it's true if studies show it. And it is true. Actually, studies do show this. This is not a false statement. There are studies that show that a good education leads to these outcomes. So that pulls people in, the idea that there are studies that support the value proposition of public education. And the second statement, so if we invest in our schools, we're going to get outcomes that we all want. So that investment piece, so studies and investment, those are kind of critical issues to how persuasive the argument is about this value proposition for public education. And we can go to the next slide. As Hans pointed out, we also wanted to test the reach of messages. So when you think about an elevator pitch, and as Hans pointed out, sort of that analogy of the selecting the menu, you don't just have one phrase that you say. You complement that phrase with other statements. And so if 60% of respondents find that first message persuasive, if it's complemented by these other messages, it reaches 90% of respondents. And what was interesting here for us in Georgia was it was very different. This was really the one time where state-level results didn't track national results. It was very different here in Georgia, how the suite of messages complemented one another, how that differed from our national sample. And I'll just point out the messages that resonated here in Georgia were, again, that education improving life, followed by the civics message, and then by the American exceptionalism message, and then by the international competitive message. And then nationally, was different. Still, the number one message was that education improving life outcomes. That was the most resonant message. But it was complemented by the American exceptionalism message. And then followed by that values, instilling values message. And then finally with that melting pot message. So we wanted to give you a glimpse into this. And I think when you talk with your friends here at the Georgia Partnership, consider the language that you use when you're talking to your stakeholders, when you're talking to the broader community, even when you're talking amongst yourselves. And also consider, like, what are the core values? What are the most important values to our polity with regard to our education system? And so that's it. Thank you for your time. Over to you.
to be videotaping this so you can look at this later, but we'll have these slides on our website also, so you can see them up close and read them again for yourself. But as we are talking about improving education, not reforming education, but improving education in Georgia, we have a study that will help you do that. 2 years ago, we received funding from the Guzzetta Foundation to do a education gap analysis of policy, looking at where Georgia is compared to other high-performing states and countries, what policies do we have that are strong or weak or missing. And through that funding, we're able to bring Caitlin on our team to help Dana, and they have plowed through the research internationally for over a year of time. There's over 100 pages that will be on our website that give all that for those data geeks, the policy geeks in the room. You can go into that in detail. On the left side of your folder are summaries of each of the pieces that we have found that are important. I mentioned earlier the list of people who are on our steering committee, and on the back, the 25 people who are involved in our advisory committee. We want to do this work. We want to do this heavy lifting to look at the gap analysis of ed policy. But while we will produce this, we don't want it just to be the Georgia partnerships. We want it to be something that all of you can use. We want you to be able to look at this and say, wow, of these 7 areas that have been identified, our work in our organization fits right in here, or in these 2 areas. Or we're pretty strong with some of these ourselves, but we need to work on another one. We also hope this will be a powerful tool with our elections coming up. We already have meetings scheduled with some of our gubernatorial candidates to say, here is your education policy. Here are some pieces in green that are really strong. Don't mess this up. It's going well for Georgia. Here are some areas that need to be improved. So we are excited to roll this out today. I said earlier, it's a lot of work, but it's something we hope that will be helpful for you in your work with your organization, and something that will be helpful with our legislators as they're coming up. You see the bio, again, for Dr. Dana Rickman, our Director of Policy and Research. What's not on there are some other things, like she leads our Education Policy Fellows Program. I know there's several fellow alums in the audience. She writes, or at least coordinates, the oversight of writing our award-winning Top 10 Issues to Watch in our Economics of Education. Perhaps the most important thing that's not on there is she's the mom of 2 beautiful little twin girls. With that, Dr. Rickman.
Good morning. I am really, really excited to be here this morning in front of all of you to bring to you EdQuest Georgia. And so Steve did a nice job of setting me up, and so we're just going to dive right into EdQuest. As Steve mentioned, with funding from Guzzetta, we at the partnership set out about 2 years ago to answer the question, what policies do all high-performing states and countries, what education policies do they all have in common? What do they share? Furthermore, we really wanted to understand what aspects of those commonalities do we have in Georgia, and what are areas where we can learn from what they have to move our own state forward. So first, what I want to talk to you about very briefly is, where are we in Georgia? Current state. We have general benchmarks to sort of look at how we're doing as a state education-wise in Georgia. And for those of you that are from the Atlanta area and you're familiar with our Learn for Life coalition, which is our Strive coalition here in the metro area, these are the same benchmarks that Learn for Life follows as well. And so but this will be statewide data that we're using. And the first benchmark, 4-year-olds in high-quality early learning centers. This number is based on licensed capacities of quality-rated centers in Georgia in the 0 to 4 population. We're at 17%. Third grade reading, I think we all know the importance of being able to read proficiently by the 3rd grade. This is based on the 2016 Georgia milestones, the percent of 3rd graders that were proficient or above, 35%. 8th grade math, again, this is Georgia milestones 2016. Proficient or above, we're at 34%. We just had our 2017 high school graduation rates published. Very exciting. We're moving in a great direction for high school graduation. We're up to 81%. Now, these next two data points are based on the graduating high school class of 2012. You'll see why in a second. For the high school graduating class of 2012, 68% of them enrolled in post-secondary. That's very encouraging. It means most of our students understand the importance of going on and enrolling into a post-secondary institution. And I want to be clear from the beginning, when we talk about post-secondary, we're talking about all aspects of something beyond high school. Technical college, four-year degree, something beyond high school, post-secondary. However, of that class, by 2016, so 4 years later, 15% had completed some sort of credential. So that's what we look like as a state. How do we stack up compared to other states in the nation? Where are we competitively? On national assessments, first we look at the NAEP, which is the National Assessment of Education Progress, and it's the only assessment that's given in every state in the country, so we can compare how we're doing versus our neighbors in the South or Massachusetts or Minnesota or wherever. And so the first is fourth grade reading. I will say that they don't give the NAEP in the third grade, so we do fourth grade reading. And these are the most recently published NAEP results, the 2015. Georgia was slightly below the national average in 2015. But the good news here, over the past 10 years, Georgia ranks 9th in the country in terms of increasing scores on the NAEP. So we're moving up and we're moving in a good direction. We're not where we want to be, but we're progressing fairly well. Similar results, though not quite as encouraging in math. We were at 28% in 2015. National average was 32%. We're 11th, though, across the country in terms of moving our math scores up. So we're making progress. We're just not where we want to be. High school graduation. You can see Georgia highlighted here, our graduation rates between 2010 and 2015. This compares us, this is the SREB states, the Southern Regional Education Board, so you can see how we're doing regionally. And in 2015, we were up to 78.8%. But again, we're not the leader, but we're growing the fastest in terms of the number of graduates that we're producing. Our change rate over that time was at 6.3, which is the highest by a fair margin on that list. So we're making good progress as a state. However, we're not a top performer yet. We're not where we need to be. So for us, that begs the question, how does Georgia move the needle for all students so that we'll continue to get better and we actually do become one of those top performing states in education? So to answer that question, as Steve said, we did the research. We found 7 core policy areas that were present throughout all high-performing states and countries internationally. These are the 7, you can read them on here. The key for these systems, though, is that they don't view these core areas as individual areas that need to be looked at separately. They view them as an integrated, coherent system working hand in hand. And so we use the image of the gears. And we borrowed from gears, our early learning partners, that if one of those gears gets stuck, the whole system can't work. They have to all be working together to create forward momentum. So historically, education research has really examined the effectiveness of individual programs. That's very important and we should continue doing so. However, focusing on individual programmatic outcomes can really limit their impact. No matter how well designed and implemented a single program is or a group of programs, in isolation, they have relatively small impacts on student achievement. So our hope is with EdQuest is to provide a policy framework for understanding Georgia's system across all of these areas and how these parts and pieces fit together. For example, if you simply raise academic standards in isolation and you do nothing else, that really does nothing for student achievement. You have to think about, did we align new textbooks? Did we align the curriculum? Did we provide the appropriate teacher training? Are there resources to help students meet these new expectations? It's not simply a matter of one policy decision. They're all connected. So as Steve mentioned, what we've done is across each of these 7 areas, there's a giant report on the website that we did not print because it's 120 pages, but please download it and read it at night when you can't sleep because it's a page turner. But across each of these areas, we documented the best practices, and all of our references are there so you can see how we benchmarks and who we're comparing against. And we also did a Georgia landscape. What's happening in Georgia in each of those areas? With those two buckets of information, we overlaid those to each other, and we could really identify where Georgia's strong, where we are implementing and pushing those best practices that other high-performing systems are doing. But it also created opportunities for us for where we may want to explore so that we can get better as a state. As Steve mentioned, we had a small steering committee that really guided this work for us over the past 2 years. We also engaged an advisory committee over the past to help guide this work as well. But what was really important, and you can see their names on the website, for each of those 7 core areas, we had review groups of people who were in the field, in the state, doing this work. And those review groups reviewed all of this for us and said, hey, you're missing this piece, or hey, you got that wrong, and they really validated how we were benchmarking. And so I feel pretty confident in what we're putting out, that to our best estimation, I don't claim to know everything about everything. I know very little about some things, but hopefully we get a broad landscape so you can see who's doing what in these areas. And so I can't thank the hard work of all of our advisors, our steering committee, and especially our review groups. And I have to give a huge shout out to Caitlin Doherty Kokinas, who was my partner in crime in all of this. And so what you have in your handout or in your folders are short one-pagers to give you a brief glimpse summary of what we found. And so for the next few minutes in the time I have left, I'm going to give you an even briefer summary of what we found across these areas. The first one, foundations for learning. High supporting systems have the twin goals of supporting children's development and also parent participation in the labor market. You can see the Alliance for Early Success has a wonderful policy framework. As you think about pulling these policies together for early learners and getting kids ready for kindergarten, you really have to think about health, early learning, and family supports as a unit. The opportunities and foundations for early learning, and you'll see that we've sort of labeled these red, yellow, and green. Just very briefly, if something is red, it's a policy that we are either missing as a state, or we have and we're not implementing very well, or we have it and we're working on it, but it's really urgent that we get that done. Yellow is usually a policy that we have, but the caution is we haven't had it for very long, and so we need time to study it to make sure it's working, or it's actually a great program or a great policy, but it's too small, and we need to think about how to scale it up to be more effective. And then the green are just, this is a strong policy, it's working great, let's keep supporting it and moving it forward. So in early learning, one of the reds, Georgia in 2015 had the second highest percent of uninsured individuals in the nation. Health insurance is a significant problem here in Georgia, especially for low-income people, and we need to figure out how to fix that. One of the greens are statewide coalitions are very strong in Georgia, and we need to continue to support them and leverage them. For example, the Get Georgia Reading campaign, the campaign for grade level reading. They've united multiple agencies and state leaders around a common expectation using shared language. The Get Georgia Reading campaign has already had a significant impact in strengthening foundational supports for young children. And if you don't know about the Get Georgia Reading campaign, and looking at the faces in the audience, I'm sure all of you do, it's a wonderful statewide network that needs to continue to be supported and pushed. And that's just one example. Quality teaching. There are some elements here of high-performing systems with quality teaching. There's more in the report and on your sheet. But generally speaking, high-quality systems have selective entrance requirements, competitive salaries, continuous professional development, and professional learning. One of the urgent areas under quality teaching is to address teacher equity. Or as we learned earlier today, Michael, it should be teacher fairness. Is that the language I should use? We know higher percentages of inexperienced first-year teachers are found in schools with the highest concentrations of students in poverty and minority students. Students in these schools are also twice as likely to have a teacher teaching out of field, and they have higher rates of both principal and teacher turnover. This is an area that Georgia has been looking at and is working on and takes very seriously. However, we feel this is an urgent issue that we must address immediately and in a very strong way. Quality leadership. High-performing systems have in place policies that develop leaders at all levels, from the teacher in the classroom, principals, district leaders, state leaders. Quality leadership is essentially important to keep the education system moving forward. Some of the opportunities, we have a lot going on in leadership in Georgia right now, and some of them are very successful and some of them are new. We have things like leadership training through GLSSI, through the Georgia School Superintendents Association. We have best practice programs like the Gwinnett County's Quality Plus Leadership Academy. There's a commission right now that's studying a principal academy for leadership. As a state, we need to come together and figure out how to leverage the successful programs we have, where there are holes that we need to shore up to ensure that we have this access statewide in an equitable, fairly distributed way. Supportive learning environments. Learning environments inside the school and outside the school, home and neighborhood, really set the stage for all students to be successful. You see some of the elements there of high functioning systems, and I have to say this is an area where I feel that I'm very proud of the work that Georgia is doing. One of the positive conditions for learning that breaks out to sort of safe and respectful climate, high expectations, social and emotional learning. A lot of this is work that's going on in Georgia right now. That last bullet, out of school time options, there's been a lot of discussion over the past couple of years, and especially over the past year or two, around how to turn around chronically struggling schools, turn around schools. There's a big focus now on out of school time, wraparound services. That's an excellent place for Georgia to be. The best practice research supports that work. So supportive learning environments, I wanted to give a shout out to one of our greens, the school climate work that Georgia has been doing. The Georgia Education Climate Coalition. They have an all-in campaign, seeks to engage all community partners and create a positive learning environments for Georgia's children and youth. There are 16 different state-level partners in addition to the Georgia Department of Education and the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, really working on positive school climate for both young children and children in schools. An advanced instructional system. High-performing systems really have figured out a way to link and provide a very strong foundation where you see high standards aligned to a strong curriculum, a strong and effective accountability system. This foundation allows then for personalized learning and innovation, and you see these things working seamlessly together in high-performing systems. One of the things I wanted to point out sort of on the yield, proceed with caution, is support the Georgia Milestones Assessment System. I'm going to take a moment to talk about assessments here in Georgia. The Georgia Milestones Systems has been evaluated by an outside independent entity. It has been found that it really is a valid and aligned measure, aligned to our standards, as a test of are our students learning what we want them to learn by the end of the year. There are a lot of conversations now in Georgia about the proper role of assessments, and I think that's a serious conversation that we need to continue to have. The role of formative assessments and how do we best use these assessments to really inform instruction. And so we encourage that discussion to keep going, and what's the right balance. Clear pathways to post-secondary success. And again, post-secondary is not just the four-year college. It's technical college, it's certificates, it's moving from K-12 into a successful career, workforce, post-secondary institution. There's three main elements under this category. The first is clear pathways, so that students can transition successfully from K-12 into their choice of post-secondary arrangement. This is another area where Georgia shows very well. Our CTAE programs, our career pathways, dual enrollment, our college and career academies, these are examples for the rest of the nation to follow, which is really exciting when we can say that about Georgia. The second area is innovative policies to increase post-secondary completion. So once students get into their post-secondary institution, how do we ensure that they actually finish? You saw that drop-off rate on the Georgia data earlier. Again, this is an area where Georgia is an exemplar in guided pathways. Guided pathways provide support systems to students to keep them enrolled in a clear path to graduation. It includes additional services to help reduce equity gaps and be clear about completion expectations. The work being done at Georgia State University right now is being held up as a national exemplar about how to accomplish this. And then also and the third area is financial resources for all students, which leads us to our opportunities. Georgia must develop a statewide need-based aid program to really cut into that drop-off percentage that we saw between the percentage of students that enroll in post-secondary and the percentage of students that actually complete a degree or certificate or program. Georgia does have some statewide need-based aid programs in place. However, we are one of only 2 states in the country that does not have a comprehensive statewide need-based aid program available to all low-income students. In the final area, I'm so glad there were only 7. Otherwise, we've been here all day. But our final area is adequate and equitable funding. Elements of high-functioning systems, it's not necessarily just more funding and more funding and more funding. It's how they think about funding and how they spend their dollars. And so highly successful systems, they really tie resources to the cost of education, depending on the circumstances of the student and the expectations that they have set for them. And so they really do the cost analysis of how much will it take to get this type of student, low income, high income, English language learner, what do they need to do to achieve the level of expectation of proficiency that we have set for them? And there's details in the report and online about how these, a lot of states and then other countries do this as well. One of the opportunities for Georgia, I think we really need to get back to basics and really conduct a cost assessment of education in the state. We're very clear and we know exactly how much we spend on education. We know what we're spending, and we know down to the district level how we're spending it for the most part in terms of our ability to track the dollars down to the district. What we don't know and what we don't have a good handle on is how much does it actually cost, right? We know it theoretically costs more to educate a child living in poverty. A lot of really smart kids living in poverty has nothing to do with their cognitive ability, but they come with burdens and other sorts of issues that they have to overcome, and that just costs more. Wraparound services we know help. How much does that cost? How much is a high quality, effective after-school program? What does that look like? And really get a handle on what we're asking our education system to do and the resources that we're giving them to do it. I think that's a start for us. So as we've mentioned several times, if you go to edquestga.org, the full report is there. And it includes, for each core area, it includes very detailed, exhaustive work across those 1, 2, 3, 4, the first 5 bullets. The resources in green, I'll get to that in a minute. The red ones here, we've briefly touched on today. There's a lot more in the report, and you can see the Georgia data benchmarks to the best practices. You can read about the Georgia landscape. The one in green is resources. That's not in the full report, but is available online. So resources by each of the 7 categories. And so the resources include our resources for writing the report, so you can see how we benchmarked and documented, but also other resources in terms of if you're interested in Foundations for Learning, for example, who else is in that space? Who's doing that work? Where can I find more information about that? If you don't want to read all 120 pages, I understand. But if you're particularly interested in an area, that you can also download just sections. If you just want the Georgia landscape for post-secondary access, you can pull that down in a PDF file. So we've tried to make this, we have a lot of information up there, but as user-friendly and engaging as possible. So I hope you spend some time on the website. Also, too, through the website, we have the overall benchmarks, but we also have access to our STEAM asset map, which I think a lot of you may be aware of. It's been live now for a couple of weeks, that really tracks visually on a map where is Georgia investing in STEAM, science, technology, engineering, and math. It doesn't rate programs, we don't have that kind of capacity, but just get to a sense of where are the dollars going. And as we think about equity and fairness, it wouldn't surprise you to look at this map. All of our dollars are going Metro Atlanta, a little bit over in Savannah, a little bit in Augusta, some in Macon, and then maybe 1 or 2 dots. The rest of the state is pretty bare. And so as for some of you in the business community or in the philanthropic community that want to know, where is there a lack of STEM investments, I'd like to get involved, this map can show you. Where are we overinvested, if that's a problem? Even in Metro Atlanta, I think a lot of us have run into, you have one school that has 15 different partners investing in very similar activities, and one school 4 blocks over that only has one. This helps us get a sense of how we are, because STEAM is so important to our economic future, and really helps engage students that you can find access to the STEAM map there as well. So finally, our goal with EdQuest Georgia is to provide a helpful framework for state education so that other advocates, policymakers, and educators can be more effective with their own work. We hope to serve as a reminder. So as we move forward with reform policies and we as a state work on leadership, for example, that it will remind everybody that as you work on leadership, you're also having an effect on teachers. You're having an effect on supported learning environments. You're having an effect on access to post-secondary. These are all connected. There was a very smart member of our advisory committee that early on in this process, she said, you know, this feels like, this policy framework you've put together feels like a blueprint for a house. I said, tell me more. This is interesting. And she said, you know, every house, no matter what it looks like, has the same foundational elements to make it a house. It's got to have floor, walls, ceiling, door, and we want a high-performing house, right? We want to be one of the top houses in the nation, so you probably need plumbing, electricity, Atlanta, HVAC system. So every house has to have those elements to be a high-performing house. That's what we're talking about the frame with EdQuest Georgia. We're not talking about what color are the carpets, what type of granite, tile should I have in the kitchen. My kitchen I have designed to meet my family's needs, and I love my kitchen. My co-author on this work, Caitlin, she has designed her own kitchen, and she loves her kitchen. And it looks very different from mine, because her family needs are different than mine. She does not have 2 infant twins at home. However, while as highly functional as both of our kitchens are, if neither one of us had walls and a roof, they would not be as functional and as impactful as they could be. And so we're hoping that these policies can provide walls and a roof. Let me give you one more example. In developing EdQuest, we've partnered very closely with the Georgia Vision Project. The Georgia Vision Project has been working for years across the state with local school boards and local districts to implement a lot of these best practice policies at the local level. We feel that the state policy framework that we're working on here will really help guarantee that the work that the Georgia Vision Project is doing in the states, as they perfect their kitchen in each of their districts, they'll be confident that that kitchen is supported by walls and a roof. That's what we're trying to accomplish with EdQuest Georgia, and we hope that it's helpful to your work as well. And then as you move forward with EdQuest Georgia, with your new language that you heard about today on how to be persuasive and really how to engage the public, I want now to turn to our conversational, classroom style small group discussion. And we want you to look at, you should have a facilitator at your table, and I use the word facilitator usually, more of just somebody to say, yeah, you guys are doing this right. And that person is most likely was a member of either our steering advisory or our review groups. And so they've sort of been involved in this process. And I want you guys to really think about these 3 questions. The first, how will the information provided today or through EdQuest Georgia really help inform your work? It's important for us as the partnership to know that we're providing a useful product, and knowing how you want to use it will help us continue to give you useful information. How will your organization support the rollout of EdQuest Georgia? And then anything else you want to tell us. And then at your table, appoint somebody to take notes so you can remember. And then at the end of our time together, we'll have a brief report out session. We won't go table by table, but as people want to share their ideas, appoint somebody to sort of report out what your conversation looked like. And the first task to support the rollout of EdQuest Georgia, you will see you have these on your table. We ask that you think about how you may use EdQuest Georgia, either personally or professionally. Write it down, and as Caitlin said, this is our attempt to engage the millennials. Take a selfie, and then use your favorite form of social media, Twitter, Instagram, whatever the kids are using today, and post it with hashtag EdQuest Georgia. And so we're going to give you a few minutes, about 15 minutes, I think, to have your table talks, and then we'll come back together. So thank you very much.
That's the whole purpose of the table talk.
So what we're going to do now is that we have Steve and Diane have microphones, and they're going to walk around, and we're going to do sort of a report out, but an informal report out, that I have been told that you can report out one exciting thing that you discussed at your table, and you'll have about a minute, and we'll take table volunteers. Not all tables have to participate, and if you hear your thing from another table, you don't have to report out the same thing. You can if you want to, but you really don't have to. So what did we discuss? Where did we land on some of this?
Good morning. My name is Deborah, and on behalf of Jonathan, Tamara, and of course Robin, I have 1 minute, and I'm going to tell you all three things that we came up with within that minute. For us, we're very concerned, and we like the idea of certainly accountability and expectations with local school districts. So we think the takeaway for us would be to connect with our local school districts. Also, we discussed the importance of speaking with policy decision makers, because we think that that's who write the checks and that's who make all the decisions. So certainly speaking with policy leaders is very important to us. And finally, anything else, we were very concerned about the education piece. We don't know if that was not a part of the research, but we were very concerned about the education piece because, the parental piece, pardon me, because we all at our table believe that that piece is very important. And we would like to thank the GPEE for this longitudinal study for the state of Georgia, so thanks.
Okay, so pointing out, where are parents in all of this? How do we engage parents across each of these issues? Next.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Cole, and on behalf of our table, we had some really great discussions. But basically, we said that for all of our purposes, the number one takeaway from EdQuest is going to be that we're going to be able to better make data-driven decisions so that we can really know where the need is and where we can have the most impact within our individual organizations. And then also that this framework gives us a common language and will allow us to be more consistent in what we're addressing so that we are all working together on the same issues that are in red and that we can maybe not overlap and really address where things need the most help. So that's what we decided.
Yeah, the importance of a common language, that's a lesson we learned from our Get Georgia Reading campaign, has done that very effectively. So we're hoping to bring that to a broader frame. Jimmy.
I'm Jimmy Stokes, and on behalf of the grand and glorious Table 18.
Yay, Table 18!
I'm proud to report to you that one of the things that we found most beneficial from all of this is that the EdQuest research and the EdQuest presentation gives us a foundation to go and advocate in our communities. And we realize that we are from diverse communities. But this will provide us with the information and most certainly require us to emphasize the right and proper things and to say the right things from going forward. one of our side discussions had to do with the conflict between public education and private education. And we continue to have a concern of how can we convince people that public education is a better route for our children. Oh yeah, we want their support and their support.
Support for, and so I think some of the information that we heard from Achieve this morning can help us frame that message in a way that resonates with everybody, not just people with kids in school. Other thoughts? Yes, over here.
Hello, I'm Katrina Mitchell, and our table talked about some of the same things. The common messaging is really helpful for agencies who are working on similar issues and writing grant proposals, being able to communicate to stakeholders. But the other thing I think we talked about was how to share this more broadly, and that continuing to share this with other community groups, sharing it with parents, school district leaders, also our internal staffs and county level staff. So the example I gave is I work at the Division of Family and Children's Services, and we have road shows where we go across the state to talk to the community. Many of the folks are from the child welfare space, but not necessarily, and we've been focusing on education, and it gives us a frame and some language to talk about the importance and what local communities can do focused on education.
Okay, thank you. Yes, for us at the partnership, we've been so steeped in producing this tool and this framework, we now want to shift to a more advocacy communication campaign. And so we would like to continue these conversations about how best to share this with your stakeholders. And we will continue to ask you all, what do you need from us to effectively share it? What kind of formats, what kind of tools, how can we help you do that?
Hi, I'm Dave Peterson on behalf of Table 5, now somewhat diminished. We'll share a few thoughts. We went to the anything else topic because, yes, we want actionable stuff. As a business person, this is great. You convinced me it's important. Now what? What do you want me to do about it? So we need to connect that. We like your analogy of the house structure and systems because while there's a lot of similarities, they're all different, but they have to plug into other systems too, whether it be power, sewer, cable, school systems, so that we have roles, rules, and relationships. So I'm happy to be working with you in relationships. We'll figure out the roles and rules later.
Thank you. That sounds like some excellent next step work for Caitlin and I. And so we'll come back in a couple months and we'll let you know.
Hi, I'm William Teasley, and I'm representing Table 4. We had some interesting discussions. One of the things that sort of jumped out at us, and I was at a table with educators, was the data that you shared from early learning to post-secondary, was the sort of pyramid that we saw, and the need for a vertical alignment, so collaborative discussions to close the achievement gap, so that we have a bunch more peaks and very few or fewer troughs. Also interesting is that this information also can be shared with educators at the local level so that they can see that they're not alone, that there are voices and groups of people out there that really do get it and understand and are actually working for them and with them in order to improve education and learning for the students that they serve.
Hello, my name is Diane Jacoby, and I'm with Georgia PTA, and I am representing the lovely ladies of Table 14. And to answer your question about what more can you do to help this, we were talking about maybe not so much a train the trainer, but a package deal that would possibly include a short video that we could play like at the beginning of a presentation that really shows how these gears interconnect. Like where does equitable funding come into that teacher quality piece, that kind of thing. And then we could start conversations from there. And leading to that, to disseminate to groups, especially coming from a PTA standpoint, I know a lot of my school units don't have a lot of money, so printing these beautiful glossy color things is going to be too expensive. So if you could also put out a black and white version so they can just run it on a copier inexpensively, that would be great.
All of this, even those 2-pagers, are on the website that you can download as a PDF and print in any kind of mimeograph machine that you like. But yes, we take that into consideration. Thank you.
So at Table 9, a few of us work for national organizations, so I represent 4 states. You have the nation, basically. And so one of the things that we were thinking, and I know I have a lot of strategy calls with my executives, VPs, all these different people, is helping them understand the landscape of Georgia, where the successes are, how they integrate with what we're doing nationally to meet our goals. And so I think that this provides the opportunity for us to share this out with other states, look at all the great things that are happening in Georgia, as well as the growth potential, and then show them also, whether it be my executive strategic partners, community partners, exactly what's happening in the state and how we can use this as for legislative priorities.
Great. I'm Vanessa Meyer, so maybe, oh, sorry, I cut you off. I would just say a lot of the things that we were talking about were said before, but having a common framework and then taking the information down to the community level was what we were thinking about. So we had a school district leader here. We were thinking about how do we partner with other organizations that have a statewide presence to really get their reactions and have somewhat of a listening tour to prioritize things for their community.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm George for Linden, and let me get the mic just right. 2 exciting things happened at our table. We all represent different organizations that do different types of things, from funders to communicators to advocates to researchers. And one of the things that we found was that the conversation here today helped us to really think about the way our goals aligned and the different elements that rung true within the EdQuest framework, what rung true for each of us, and where then we could work together. Immediately, individuals were saying, oh, I need to reach out to you if you're interested in this. How can we then do this? And so that was a great example of what I think a lot of us are doing here today is building that collective impact to better the lives of kids and families.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yes, Casey.
Morning, everyone. I'm Casey Bethel, and one of the things we talked about and we really liked was that both your presentation and EdQuest equips us with those very concise but very salient points that we can use as messaging to draw other people into this conversation and also frame the conversation. When we're able to say from a credible source that Georgia is second in the nation for uninsured people, and if the parents don't have insurance, the kids can't get glasses that they need, then vision and reading becomes an issue, right? That's something that really draws people in. When we're able to say that in low-income areas, based on a study, these schools have the highest proportion of teacher and leader turnaround and the other points that you mentioned. These are bullets in the gun, to use a bad analogy, to draw people in, to get their attention, but then point them to the actionable steps, the policy recommendations that we can make, or we hope that they'll follow.
Hi, I'm Mary Kate Starkle. And I think that we obviously had a lot of conversations about the way that the framework could help us align and understand where we have synchronicities and where organizations and movements are working together. One of the slightly tangential conversations we had was about how it would help us understand where our partners and other community organizations differ in what we do and better communicate and understand their priorities so we can come together to complement their work, understand their pressures, maybe not lean on them for something when there's a huge policy issue going on, but come back around and just sort of link up our work in ways that maybe ebb and flow a little better, since there's so much going on, but all better education overall.
Yes. Casey, go on.
When we talked about how to use it, we really stressed at our table to share it, but also use it. Sometimes people will pass you something and say, hey, you should use this. And then you ask them, well, how are you using this? Well, I didn't use it. Make sure that we're the example of how to use it, as well as sharing it with others. Let's give it to as many people as we can and as many places as we can, but make sure we're using it in our work too, so we're being the example of how helpful it can be.
All right, thank you very much. You know, I have to say my heart is just filled with gratitude now, because in your discussions, it sounds like you're getting out of EdQuest what we really, really hoped that you would, that it would be a shared framework where you could see yourself in it and figure out how to leverage your work with other people doing similar work, or more importantly, break down some of these silos and work across where you didn't think what they were doing was related to what you were doing, but you could still leverage each other's work. Again, it's a framework. And I've heard what you said, that as we pivot now to the next phase of our work, we need to help provide you all tools to use this in that way. And so stay tuned, and we'll work on some sort of packaging for sharing, and maybe not a train the trainer model, Diane, as you said, but something that you can take this out into the field. We will be going out on sort of a roadshow in the second quarter of 2018 to take this out into the community to get more feedback, so stay tuned for that. And thank you again for your attention and your excitement, and just thanks. And so I'm going to throw it back to our board chair to bring us home.
So we're definitely in the home stretch. Dana, thanks a lot for leading us through that discussion as well as the working session. I mentioned at the start that this was a little bit different meeting for us in terms of engaging the audience, in terms of thoughts and ideas. I want to thank Hans and Michael from Achieve for making the trip down and sharing some provocative data for us on the nation, as well as how we compare here in Georgia. I want to thank Dana for her leadership with EdQuest and really our roadmap going forward with respect to, I don't want to say educational reform, but educational improvement for the state of Georgia. Caitlin, I also want to thank you for being the scribe. We got some good ideas from the group that we'll incorporate in the process. With that, thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of the day and stay engaged. Appreciate it very much.